So, what I'm going to do with this, because I'm talking about navigating drought, and when you're talking about drought, it's something that you can't just fix in the time of a drought. That has to be something that you work on. Um, you work on that, I guess, all the time, but you work on that over the long term to get through a drought period. So I'm going to go over. Um, So first of all, there's going to be I'll go through this first and then I'll get back to the resources. So I'm gonna go through plant available water and the easy and the difficult water that it can encounter. I'm gonna cover soil texture and water holding capacity. I'm gonna go through rooting depth and zones in season because you can have different soil textures. The plants are going to different rooting areas and they can draw from different areas in season. I'm going to cover how to determine texture and moisture on your own farm as a hand method so you can figure this out yourself. Then I'll cover the organic matter, how that interacts with moisture, and tillage because um, of course, in organic, it's very hard to get away from some type of tillage for weed control and for amendment incorporation. So, how that affects it, and also in the area that I'm in, we're in a lot of high value crops, potatoes, sugar beets. So, there's tillage. And then I'm going to end with this flow chart for soil health and how to prioritize things. And then we can have some type of a discussion on the tools that you might want to use for different things. And I will try to stop occasionally for questions because the stuff kind of builds on itself. So if there's something that's not clear early on, then I want to make sure that it's covered before I keep moving on. So as I said, so I do work in a lot of irrigated agriculture. And I know that, actually, I don't know this. I was kind of curious um, how many people do have access to irrigation. Um, and this is where it's really, I can't see. Let me see if I can figure out. There's no way I don't think I can see anybody else if anybody else is saying anything or looking at their camera or anything. But if you put it in the chat, I guess is the easiest. Um, if anybody is in irrigation, but um, the irrigation, when you're dealing with irrigation, it just brings a whole new level of management to a system, but you also learn a lot about how water flows and how you can get water into the system. So I'm bringing a lot of stuff in from this irrigation manual. Um, and I have a document put together and I'll email it. I guess it's probably Drew that I would send it to. That um, with all the links to a lot of these everything that I talk about here, I've tried to put together, um, tried to make sure I have it all into a document, so that you can look it up later. Okay, okay, I just see one there, irrigated. Okay, so some of them have irrigation. Um, so you should be familiar with this, but it's a really interesting way to learn about the soil when that is something you can manage as your water. This nutrient management guide from Alberta, it's a really excellent resource. It goes through all kinds of stuff on soils, um, everything about soils, nutrient flows, manure application, everything. So I'm bringing that into it. And then this Upper Midwest Tillage Guide, which is a very interesting book that goes through how to use tillage um, in I guess how to choose tillage properly or what you can do with tillage in the context of the Midwest. So this one first slide here about water um, and the forces acting on it. I think I have most things covered on here. So if we start on the bottom, and let me get, yes, so that should be working there. So on the bottom, we have gravity is going to be pulling water down in deeper into the soil. We have the soil particles, the sand, silt, clay, that are going to be exerting their maybe they're not actively exerting, but they can pull on water too, because of water's very unique ability to cling to surfaces. We have the organic matter, which also can hold on to water or grab that water. And I've kind of got it. It's not exactly the direction it goes in the soil, but then I have here, it's kind of, this is more the stuff that kind of goes up and out of the soil. I put fungi in with roots because we have the mycorrhiza fungi that work like root extensions and they're moving water around. So we kind of have the roots in that fungi system that they're pulling on the water. The soil critters, so the larger things than microbes like the insects, earthworms, anything like that, ants, are something else in the system. I just even thought of it now. I'm not sure where groundhogs or gophers get their water from, but they're another soil critter running around in the system. And then the atmosphere, which is pulling water up in evaporative forces. So we've got all these draws on the water, and actually the roots are just one part of it that are trying to access this water. So the definitions when we're looking at water and how it goes into the soil, there's the saturation point. So if you think about when it's raining, like when it's actively raining, those top few inches of the soil are fully saturated because the air spaces and the spaces that would normally hold water, everything is full. It's a fully saturated soil. Field capacity is after approximately 24 to 48 hours. So say the rain comes, maybe you get, let's say, an inch of rain. If you go out after, while it's raining or just after it stopped raining, it'll be a certain distance down in the soil. It'll be very, very muddy in the top, but then you give it a day and it kind of just, it moves itself down through. So then that's considered field capacity. So that's when there's air pockets. The water is all clinging to the soil particles and organic matter. So that's considered the capacity of the field to hold water. And then the permanent wilting point is the point when plants can't access the water and have got to the point where they're dead, is the permanent wilting point. So of course hopefully you don't see that in season. But I've also put in here that at this field capacity, the plants have easy access to the water. And then at the permanent wilting point, they have to, as it gets closer to that permanent wilting point, they have to work harder to get to that water. So even though it's the same amount of water, the plants have to work differently to get it. And this was on a webinar, so only 3 days ago. I saw this slide up and I just took a screenshot of it, or this chart, because it covers everything in those definitions very well. So, so your saturation point is when all your air spaces and all your, like, everything in the soil is full of water. So at this point, they call this the Len called it the temporary storage. Um, it's what it can hold momentarily, but gravity is pulling the water down. Available water is once that water has um, has evened itself out, has over a day or two. And then the unavailable water, and I'm going to get to this momentarily. There is water in the soil that is there, but plants can't get to it. And we would think it's a dry soil. We would think there's no water in it, but there is water in it. And then he's also listed here. There's the more available and the less available. And I'll be coming back to that. So this is the soil texture triangle. Um, this this one here, there's many different versions of them, and some of them will list the it'll be more like an equilateral triangle with the silt listed on the one side of it, or up on this side here. But this one is from that nutrient management guide, and I think it kind of makes a little more sense to follow. And I think part of the reason is that all of us know what sand is and we know what clay is, but silt is a very tough thing to kind of get your mind wrapped around, or you can't really, um, you don't really know silt as well. And I'm going to be coming to what silt particles are. They're that partway particle between sand and clay. But if we look on this here, so say like with a sandy loam soil, 70% sand, 10% clay. So then you can, you just have to do a little bit more math in this. And then that would mean 20% of it is silt. And this type of soil here is what I deal with a lot. I actually have loamy sand in some cases it's really good potato growing land, but its problem is that it blows easily. The wind does pick it up. So, and I do have actually I have one field that is right here, right in the center of that loam. So it's 40% sand, 20% clay, and then of course 40% silt. Um, and it is one of the most consistent and uniform fields that I have. It's just so nice because it doesn't blow easily. I don't even know if I've ever seen it blow. And it takes in water nicely, and it just grows really nice crops. So, and clay loam, I wanted to bring it up here, and you can see that um, this is where, these are whoever has constructed, exactly what is a loam and what's a clay loam and all these types of things. But you'll always get borderline ones. Like I have a lot of soils that are fit, like say are like 75% sand. And, technically it's a sandy loam, but it's really it's almost like beach sand. So, but then say with this clay loam, it's going to be more clay as you get in this area here, but then this clay loam, so let's see here, 30% sand. Yeah, okay, so yeah, 30% sand, and it could be about 30 or more percent clay, and then the rest is silt. And these ones are kind of interesting. In my area, um, a lot of our deeper soil tends to be a clay loam. So that would have been more stuff that would have been settled in an ancient lake. And then what we have over top is more of a sandy loam. So I think a lot of it is what's come off the glaciers and erosion for thousands of years. So we have kind of this interesting thing where we have a sandier soil on top and then a clay soil deeper down. Deeper down, but not too deep. It's anywhere from 12 to 24 inches down. And then sometimes the surface is this clay loam. And then some areas it's just sandy loam all the way through. This one field that I have is It's a loam soil. I've went down 3 feet deep, and it's just loam soil all the way down. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful piece of land. So the soil texture is going to drive what how much water you can hold. And then the other part of this slide here is how much is available to the plants. And so I put this chart in. It's from the irrigation manual. And I put it in. I've got or I left everything in it just to show you it. So you can always look it up later. You can also see that I converted the millimeters per meter to inches per foot, because I know myself I still think mostly in inches and feet. That's what almost everybody here thinks in or talks in. Um, but both units are up there. But what I'm gonna do is on this next slide here, I've cleared out um, many of um, the different kinds of soil types, and I have just concentrated on 3 different ones because they're probably the more common ones, and they also kind of fit a nice progression. So I'll show you this here. Um, so first of all, bulk density. So this is one of my first questions because I want to try to get some interaction here. And as I say, I can't see anybody's faces, so it's a little weird as you are talking into a screen when you can't see anybody. So I just rely on the chat here, which I've been able to get up on my one screen here. So um, does anybody know why so if you notice, a sandy loam is a heavier soil than a clay loam. Anybody want to put in some guesses as to why do we call the clay soils when the bulk density is the opposite? So I'll just leave it and see if anybody puts anything up in there. I'll just go over to this next column here, field capacity, percent by weight. So this is where irrigation irrigation science can get really complicated really fast. So this is the percent by weight. This is what the soils can hold. So here you'll see a sandy loam can hold 14% of its weight in water. The loam is at 20 and the clay loam is at 26. So kind of the answer to the question, I didn't see anything in the chat. Even though the particles of a clay are lighter than a sand, when they hold water, they get heavier. And I think we're used to calling it heavy because it stays in place, or it tends to stay in place better. Sandier soils tend to blow or flow away easier. From here, what I had talked about, that permanent wilting point, that's the point when plants can't access any more water. And so you'll notice that the clay loam holds 12% of its weight in water that plants cannot access, whereas a sandy loam actually is only 5%. And that comes down to the particle size, which is the next slide. So then we get these available water holding capacities, and this should make sense for anybody that has these types of soils. The sandier soils just don't have the capacity to hold as much water as a more clay soil. And then, and again, and I guess I'll just explain, these are all calculations, but they are backed up by field measurements as well. So this shows how much water, available water, you can hold in the soil. So in the millimeters per meter, which would be probably the extent of most crops' rooting depth, You can see that sandy loam can hold 140 millimeters, and the clay loam is 200. And then in units that make a little more sense, even if you think of inches per 30 centimeters or however you want to convert it. So in every foot of soil, a sandy loam can hold 1.7 inches of available water, and a clay loam is at 2.4. So what this means is that if your soil is starting out at the permanent wilting point, or basically as dry as it can be, to fill the profile 1 foot deep in the soil, you're going to need 1.7 inches to do that in a sandy loam. But in a clay loam, you're going to need 2.4. Anyways, you can see the difference in the capacity of different types of soils to hold water. So here are here are again some really good charts from that Alberta nutrient management book. So to get some ideas on soil particles. So to get a real good idea on these, if a clay particle, if you could look at a clay particle and it were the size of a tennis ball, or even if you think of like those ball pits for kids, when you can put kids in them to wear themselves out. Um, the balls will be 2 or 3 inches in diameter. Let's see here. Okay, I just have to look at my notes here. So a silt particle would be, so again, I said the clay, say if it's like 2 to 3 inches, a silt particle would be about 30 to 50 feet in diameter, or 10 to 15 meters. And a sand particle would be about 250 feet or 75 meters in diameter. A sand particle up to 250, so maybe even if you say 100 to 150 foot, would be the size of those particles. So when you're looking at a soil, or when you're seeing the difference between sand, silt, clay, sand particles are just massive compared to a clay particle. A clay particle, you can't physically see a particle without a microscope. So this here is just an example calculation that they give to show surface area to volume. So in this example, an 8 centimeter by 8 centimeter by 8 centimeter cube would have 0.75 centimeters of surface area per every cubic centimeter. But then this one here, where they're divided up into 2 centimeter blocks, is going to have 4 times the amount of surface area. So a clay particle is thousands of times more surface area. So there's just so much more area that it can hold water and bind nutrients and organic matter and all kinds of stuff. So, so on this next one here, just to bring it all together, if there's any questions, put them in the chat, or come on your mic and say something at this point. And then otherwise I'll just move on to the next part. But I'll just go over this here. Like, so just to review, these are the soil textures. Of course, your soil could be anything, but it's more likely going to be in this kind of range here. And then these are the particles that make it up, and then this is the water holding capacity. And then you have to remember too, like these, sandy loam does have some clay in it and some silt in it, so it's a mixture of all these different particles interacting. So I'll go on to this plant available water. So this is where the calculations really are helpful in for irrigation management. And then, of course, when you don't have irrigation, it is helpful in just knowing how much water you need or how much your soil can take up. So I've put these together. It's millimeters and inches, um, and it's per 30 centimeters or a 1 foot layer of soil. So you should recognize these numbers, that 1.7, 2.2, and 2.4 is the available water that these soils can hold if they're right full. So this available water after the field is drained out or is drained down, field capacity. Under irrigation, if we can keep it in this range here, these are very happy plants because it's not too wet and it's not too dry. But you can see that you can see you don't have a lot where the plants are their happiest. 8.5 millimeters, 11, 12. So that can disappear on you pretty fast in a matter of days. Typical when you're irrigating, it might get a little dry and then it might get a little wet. So this is your range. And then I put in this wide range here if it gets really too dry or really too wet. Below about 35% moisture, the plants really aren't doing well. They're trying to conserve and shut down things even though they can still access water. And so where does it take it from? This chart here on the top shows a typical crop, and you'll notice that the scale here says percent of depth. So, and then days of emergence, days after emergence. So, say in the first month or so, it's only going to use about 50% of it's going to be down about 50% of the way into the root zone. And I can verify this from what I have seen with irrigation. I'm going to be coming to it in a few slides of using a Dutch auger to actually go down and check the soil moisture to depth. And it'll be dry. You'll be hitting dry soil, then all of a sudden you'll hit a line where it turns moist. And so you can tell exactly where the rooting zone is or where the roots have the current rooting zone, because the rooting zone is dynamic. It's always changing. And so you can see here so say a couple months, it will have that full zone explored as long as it can get to it. And so of course that's how we're going to work on mitigating drought or helping to get the plants through, is trying to get it to use as much of that zone as you can. And this is interesting too. This would be under irrigation, but even under probably normal rain-fed systems. 40% of the moisture. So say if we're going to look at say a grain or oil seed, and if your top, we're for easy looking at the scale here, and because we're mostly talking about the oats. So say if you have a 100 centimeter rooting zone, 40% of its water is usually taken up in that top 25 centimeters, so about the top foot or so. And then deeper down, another 30%, and another 30%, if those roots can get down there, it will take it from that lower zone. So if you think about a normal rain-fed system or even irrigation, it's not often that you have enough to fill the whole profile at once. You'll get smaller rains that fill it, and then it depletes, and then fills a little more and depletes. And so so a lot of what it takes up is in the surface area, but if the plant can get its roots down deep and if there's water down there, it has that reserve for when it gets drier up top. Ideally, if you can start the year with the full root zone filled up, or like say if you can go down, so say if we're talking like grain, if it's a meter, if you've got a 1 meter rooting zone where, if its roots can go down to a meter, if you can start with that rooting zone full, once you get the plant established, you kind of you don't let it get too dry, but you try to force it to keep rooting down. So so that's the ideal case where you start out with a full profile, and of course, like early on, it doesn't have the roots down deeper, so you kind of keep filling it, kind of replenishing it, but then it also, as long as it has that pathway, because if there's a like if it's wet on top and then dry and then wet below, it's not going to be able to get to it. Early on, yep, it's it's very shallow roots, and then I kind of adapted these numbers a little bit just more from my experience. But and also potatoes are tough because whether you count the hill or whether you count the surface. Very early stages, they'll only take from within the hill and then maybe about 6 inches below. And it kind of depends on where the seed piece is and where you're thinking of it. But yeah, they don't go too deep. But they are one. It depends on the variety, but they will start putting roots deeper down, because we've seen it where I had 1 year where we got a whole bunch of rain and got really wet. And then we thought, okay, well, we're going to try to hold off on irrigation to make sure that, to try to encourage them to root deeper. And then we had a heat a few weeks later, and they had they'd went down at least 12 inches, maybe even more, and had it sucked dry deeper down below the hills. So yeah, so they'll move down. So so I guess to answer the question, it's one of those things where I guess for an example, like this year we started out very dry, irrigated, and like we didn't have a lot of water reserves, and then dry land was very dry, but we got a lot of timely rains early, and the crops were looking really good, but they had only rooted 6 inches or 12 inches down because they were just, as I said in that, I'll just go back. Yeah, so see here, like as I shown here, and this is the really fascinating thing for me as I learned irrigation. So if you think about a 1.7 inches, and it's kind of interesting to test this too. So say, you're starting out with dry soil, there's nothing much there. You put down an inch, you get this good inch rain, and you think, wow, that's a lot of water. And then you go down and it's only 7 or 8 inches down, and then it's dry, and you think, well, where did it all go? But and especially if you have these heavier soils, like that only might go down, let's see here, 4 or 5 inches. You might, you could scratch the surface away and you only find water down, very small area, and you think, well, where did we got an inch of rain? You'd think there was a lot there. I guess how much it takes to fill soils up with water. So so yeah, I guess like that's where it's a balancing act, because this past year, with water supplies being short, you couldn't just top up your soil to get good rooting depths, because you might run out of water. You might use up all your water, so you kind of had to balance it out. And we were fortunate we got the rains to kind of keep us going, but then yeah, we ended up with shallow roots. So I guess a lot of what it's good discussion, because it's not just people that have irrigation where this is important. It's also very important when you're in rain-fed or dryland systems, is to understand how this water is flowing through and how much water you do have. Like understanding how the water gets into the system. And I guess this is a good point to talk about this, is these prairie soils. So I live in the brown soils, and there's a lot of talk of roots going to 10 feet deep or very deep roots. But if we come back here, even say a loam, Um, 10 feet of a loam soil would need 22 inches of water to fill it up. And our typical, like our typical water is the same as, is it Franz, or Frank from last week? I was able to to watch that, the presentation last week. I was actually at the irrigated crop update a week ago. So, um, but if you think about a 10-foot, even if you have a sandy loam soil, 17 inches of water is needed to fill it. And our typical water is anywhere from 10 to 14 inches in a year. So it'd be very rare that these soils ever got filled up with water. Um, and so I guess, at depth, as I was saying here too, if you want to go down, say 4 feet in the soil, and you need, let's see here, 1.7, um, three, yeah, you need about 7 inches of water to fill that profile. That's a lot of water. Um, and it also gives you a lot of buffer too. So, and I did want to put this up here, just so you are aware, and of course you'll probably know this, is how quickly your soil can dry out in the summer. When plants have enough water, um, they can use a lot. So here with this, wheat, this is the crop use demand that's been developed in Alberta. But when it's in its peak, if you see here, 7 millimeters a day. So it can go from that 85% to 65% in one day, available water. So, and our pivot systems, that's about the most they can put down in a day. So, um, when we really want to maximize yield, um, that's how we do it. And I did have his calculation, or his rule of thumb, and I have heard this before, that you need 4 inches to grow a plant, and then 1 inch for every 7.5 bushels. This was at least on the wheat, but that's how we get close to 100 bushels of spring wheat every year here, is that we can just keep watering it. And I wanted to bring this up too, because this stage here, and I know it's challenging when you don't have irrigation to do it, but this is that critical stage. As you get them established, you get the good root zone, or if you can, they have the good full root zone, and then, we um, this is when they're really setting their yield potential. And it's not, there we go. So I wanted to talk about this year, this Dutch auger. If anybody has heard of this, has heard of a Dutch auger before. I've went through 3 or 4 of them in my time here in the last couple decades. They stand up for a long time. They work very well for a long time, but they do get damage over the years with hitting rocks or stones or stuff like that. And sometimes I like to have a spare one because it's so critical for irrigation. I put up the link, and I don't sell anything, and I don't get any money for this company, but this is the only company that I found that seems to sell them, and they'll ship anywhere. And so I've got them shipped to me a few times. This is a really, really interesting, it's a really, really valuable tool. So you'll see it there. It's about $200, and then there's the shipping on it, but, you can go down about 3 feet, maybe up to a meter down in your soil. Um, so instead of having to dig soil pits or use a shovel to look at your soil, of course the shovel, you can kind of look at roots a little bit better. But with this, you can just pull up soil anytime you want, take a look at it. What did I have here? Okay, 4 centimeters, the 4 centimeter size, because you don't need a lot of soil. You just need to pull up soil. You don't need you might as well go with the smaller one, and that also holds holds sandy soil better when you're pulling it up. And it also, it, as you hit rocks in the field, it can sometimes kind of move a little bit to the side easier than a really big one. The one other piece of advice I have, if you get one of these, um, just watch your posture, because as you're pulling on it, you can hurt your back if you're not careful. So this part here, this is where I'm ending most of the stuff on the irrigation stuff. But why I wanted to bring up that tool, it's such a valuable tool for looking to get to know your soil, not just in the surface, but to go know what's deeper down. I cut off the top of this chart, but you can download the whole chart here. I cut off the top just to put it into the slide so it's a little easier to see, because the top part is just establishing sand, which is fairly easy to establish. It doesn't hold together. But this is how you can determine the different soil textures by hand fairly easily. And then there's another resource here for, and this goes through all the different soil textures and different things to learn how to put a number to your soil moisture as well. Surprisingly here, soil moisture probes, people still like going by hand, and the soil moisture probes just are expensive and is not as user friendly as people would like them to be. So still a lot of irrigation decisions are based on this. But I put it in because I think I think it's just a valuable thing. You can be checking your soil moisture in season, and you kind of know what you have there. And then even as you're finishing the season, you can be checking it and seeing what you've got going into winter. So I'm going to move on to carbon, the carbon connection. So your water holding capacity, I just put it in here to review. When you go from sand to clay, your plant available water goes up, but you're also the water that's not plant available also increases. But the connection with carbon is that there are hundreds to thousands, probably more like thousands or tens of thousands more nooks and crannies in a clay soil. And so not only do they help to hold water better, they help to form organic matter better. And then organic matter also holds water. So I put this in here. So I've got the same, just as a reminder that you've got all these, so much more surface area to make organic matter in a clay soil or one that has a lot of clay in it. And just bring this one up here. So I've seen this show up, in some social media feeds or in certain things, this, how valuable organic matter is and how much water you can hold with it. And it is valuable. I'm going to get to it in a moment. It is very tough to build up organic matter. And I'll go through a little bit in a moment. So in the context of this drought proofing or figuring out ways to navigate drought, organic matter is one of the things that you can focus on the most. Your soil texture you can't change. I think I might have that coming up in a slide a little later. You can't change that. That's your sand, silt, clay percentage. That's just the way the soil is. But your organic matter you can work on. And this is where it's interesting. When you realize, so it says, 25,000 gallons per acre, that's fairly impressive. But in a foot of soil, and these are approximate, these are, kind of approximate numbers, ballpark numbers, but 326,000 gallons of water in an acre foot, that equals about 0.9 inches. So it's valuable in that buffering, but it's not like as if it's you get the organic matter and it's going to fix all your problems. And I guess also too, if you want to do some calculations, um, you can imagine the amount of water we have to put on under irrigation to grow the crops that we do. So, and the pumping capacity that we have. So, organic matter, the way organic matter forms is a hotly contested area of soil science right now. The idea of humic substances is mostly been set aside. They mostly figure that humic substances are an artifact of the soil testing, like it's made in the process of testing soils because they use extremely alkaline solutions to draw out the organic matter, and they think it's changing the molecules. Um, so this is kind of the main way, but it's still being debated as to where they think it goes. And I think it makes the most sense is that as you put more carbon into the system, you'll reach a saturation level, and the saturation level is on this mineral associated. So that is where the clay is, the clay, and of course the silt as well. So I talked about those spaces. There's only so many spaces for mineral associated organic matter, and this is the stuff that you'll hear people talk about. The microbes are the ones that make the long lasting organic matter. That's what this stuff is. It's the stuff that's tied onto these particles. Particulate organic matter is it's smaller stuff, and it's usually something that you could under a microscope could still see what it was. Like it could be still a cell or a pollen grain or something like that. That can just keep going up. And I think a lot of the people that claim really massive organic matter changes in short amount of time, that's what they're seeing is they're getting this particulate up. But this stuff doesn't last as long. Could be only months, it could be years. So the focus is on, building your organic matter as much as you can. But the long lasting stuff is this mineral associated. I will get, yeah. And so this is where that tillage guide, these are the scary ones where they show where you put a moldboard plow in and they, this was after the amount of CO2 that was lost after a tillage event. That's the particulate organic matter that's disappearing. So I know that why I wanted to bring this in is that tillage is tillage, you do lose organic matter, but it's not that long lasting stuff. So I want to bring, since we're already up at the hour, I will bring up this next slide here. Organic matter, if anybody thinks that I got these wrong, I'm pretty sure I got these numbers correct, but if anybody thinks that they're wrong, let me know. I chose the 60 bushels per acre because it matched up with this here to help us go across the chart. But it shows that in a more of a clay soil, our equilibrium, where the organic matter is going to sit kind of as it cycles through is going to be about the theoretical amount is about 2.5. In a more of a sandier soil, 1.3. So why I wanted to bring this up is that and you can check this out. This is another book that's free to get. This Better Soils for Better Crops. Some other stuff on organic matter is still a little bit of the older way of thinking of it, but this chart here shows they go through the realistic expectations of what you can get with organic matter. Whenever you start putting in more, when you put in more carbon inputs, you'll get more organic matter, but it reaches a new a steady state. So it'll always kind of, you can't just keep adding carbon and just building organic matter indefinitely. Um, it'll always be kind of something where you put more organic matter in and then the soil cycles it faster. Um, and then more of it goes off as CO2. And I want to bring this up here with organic matter myths. I'd be interested, like we can maybe discuss this once I get to my final slide, which is just a few away. Um, it's it seems like the more people are doing the really deep measurements, which of course are challenging to go down, especially in this one study here, 2 meters down, and doing sampling and testing at that level. Um, we think we're getting more organic matter. Okay, when you just test the surface, so in this here, so the addition of winter cover crops to a conventionally managed system um, increased the soil carbon in the surface layers, the top 1 foot, 30 centimeters, but it decreased them deeper down. And they were just as confused as everybody else, but they said they're reporting the data. They said this is what it's showing is that um, if we were just looking at the surface, we'd be thinking that the cover crops had added more organic matter total, but it's actually more just seems to be concentrating it. The soils, they seem to have a way of of getting to, maybe I don't know, like they seem to get to a certain point where they want to be, and the cover crops help to keep the organic matter closer to the surface. And this one here, many of you would know Dr. Martin Entz. And I think if anybody else had said this, you'd probably ignore it. But when he said it, then I think people paid attention. I also did have him for my master's degree when I did it back 20 years ago. Um, and he says here we've vilified tillage in the prairies, but if you had to choose between tillage and growing plants, you'd choose a good crop rotation before no-till. And he says anytime and the data supports it. Oh, and actually, this was at the 2020 Prairie Organics Conference. I hadn't even noticed that when I put this in. Um, and this here, this Bill Dean. Oh, it doesn't say his name isn't in here, but this quote is from Bill Dean, and I had him at the University of Guelph when I was there. And he says minimizing tillage is good for soils, but eliminating tillage is not necessary for a healthy soil. Oh, I didn't put that one in. I was looking at the wrong one. That was Martin Entz. That was still Martin Entz. Bill Dean at the University of Guelph. Um, I had thought I put his quote in here too, but he said that in Ontario studies that they found where long-term no-till concentrates the organic matter near the surface, but when they go at depth, they don't find as much deeper down. So why I put this in here is that I think when you're looking at your system, um, don't worry as much about tillage as maybe you think you might have to. The tillage, the less tillage we can do and the more cover crops we can put in, the better it's going to be for concentrating that organic matter. And then that's really going to be the key for drought mitigation for all kinds of stuff with drought. And I'm going to come to that in the last slide. I'm just going to see here. So this here, tillage, really the bigger issue with tillage is the water loss. So again, this is that same study where they looked at the moldboard plow. It did lose more water than the other treatments, but I did find this interesting that they found the no-till in the same period. Um, I'm not sure with the no-till if they went through it with the planter, but just to do some type of tillage. But even in a no-till system, even when you do have good residue coverage, you are still losing some water out of it. But the plowing, um, kind of the good news is like these less intensive ones, chisel plow, I think it was disc harrow, um, less water loss, but that's where our problem is with tillage, or that's where the issue is with it. So since we're at the hour, what I'm gonna do is just bring up this last slide here, and as we hopefully there's some questions as to what we can do, um, or you have some specific things or something that's come up from the presentation. This is a chart that I have created. So as you can see, Andrew McGuire out of Washington created a soil health flow chart. And he had adapted it from Kaylee Gash, who at the time, I think she might still be there, North Dakota. And then I had been using the chart for quite a while, and there were some things that were just didn't quite seem to work for prairies. So then I have adapted it again. Um, and so I'll just go through it here. A healthier soil stays in place. So in my area, if if you're leaving, if your soil is getting blown in the wind, that's you don't worry about any other. You don't worry about any other things. You don't worry about. I mean, you look through the tools and your principles, but that's your priority. Um, This has been showing a lot more in the drought, with more drought conditions, even in irrigation. Salinity and sodacity, which are related but two very different things. Salinity is the sodium salt, and sodicity is the sodium ion that collapses the soil and makes it structureless. So if those are problems, those are going to be. This is kind of in your higher areas, in your hills. You'll have probably more erosion problems because it's more sandier. In the lower areas, salinity, sodacity probably going to be the bigger area. And then if those are covered, then you kind of keep moving down the chart. And of course, in a lot of cases, if you have these problems, then you also have these problems. Well, yeah, all of the problems. So you kind of go through it as a flow chart, prioritize, good infiltration, minimal crusting. So this is where with the organic matter, like we can't change our soil texture, like whether we have a sandy loam or a loam soil or a very clayey soil, but you can use the cover crops. You could use a grazing period. Um, you can try to be low till or no till. Strip till is probably not going to work too well for grains, but that's something that's being done in this area. Um, so you can go through the tools once you've identified your problem. Um, this one here, the rooting zone fills with water, and deep drains if needed. So um, that's where I've said, if you can fill that soil rooting zone up, that's going to be one of your greatest drought mitigation strategies. But also it needs to be able to drain so that if that rooting zone gets filled up, but then if it has nowhere to go when you get really big rains or big rain years like 2010, 2011 in my area was just unbelievable amounts of rain. Then that might be something you work on. Um, the nutrient release I put in here, whether it's well timed, or erratic, and why it's not necessarily that you have to work on everything in order, but most likely, um, if you solve a lot of these other problems, then a lot of these other things aren't as much of a problem. If you work on your soil, then you work on your nutrients. And then down here, pests will never be completely under control. It's just knowing when there's some that are building or gaining a foothold. Um, as to what you need to do with it. So we can kind of, I mean, the questions can come from anywhere, but we can talk more about specific things that might work on your farm on these particular ones, but we can kind of go from anywhere from there. So